what we're going to do starting today is we're going to go over Chapter 9. So we've gone through these first 8 chapters. You can see them right here. We've got all those. And what's left is Chapter 9 and Chapter 14. Again, I'm not going to be going over Chapters 10, 11, 12, or 13 just because of time constraints and the like. So what I have done, just so you know this, okay, I thought I had it on there. Maybe I've got it on here. I don't know. No. All right, so I'll have to open it. I must have just closed it. And this, what I'm about to show you, there are now homework things out for this class, for the 156 class, and the 153 class. We'll go over those, the 156 and the 153 later today. But for the DIP class, your first homework is now out there, so I want to take a second and just go over it with you. It looks very similar because I based it off of the one that we did for Joomla at the end, last semester. So as it says, for your first DIP assignment, I would like you to create some kind of a requirements document outlining what you're going to do for your final project. The document should have an overview of what your site or app or whatever will be about, why you picked what you picked, what you hope to accomplish, etc. All right, and I put some resources down here that you might be able to use. Some of them these are all different than the ones I showed you last semester. So again, the project is to be about quality as opposed to quantity. I'm not that concerned with how long it is. Now that said, if you make a website with one page and that's all that's in it, that better be one frickin' good page. All right? And have everything in the world in it. But you get the idea. It says, I will be responsible for giving you a list of minimal components that you are to include in your project, which will be shared with you in a couple weeks. So again, there's some resources. This last thing is a YouTube presentation that this guy, he's got an accent, I'm not sure what it is. He gives on requirements. You might like it, you might not. So the schedule I've got here for the rest of the semester is really, the key thing is what we're going to be doing here. All right? And that is, all this week we're going to be going over Chapter 9. If we finish it between today and Thursday, great. And if we don't, we'll finish it next Tuesday. I'm going to go over this a lot slower. This is a complete project. I've got it fairly working now, too. All right, just so you know, and we'll talk about that in just a couple minutes. So let's assume that we follow this schedule. We get through part of it today, part of it Thursday, and we finish it up next Tuesday. Then next Thursday, I'm going to go over Chapter 14 of the book. That's the last time that we'll be using the Ullman book for this class then. That'll be it. All right? And as it says here, the plan is then for about a month, we're going to be working on this movies project. You already filled out that form I asked you to X out. All right, so you fill that out, and that's what we're going to be doing. But we're going to break it up into chunks. In other words, first we're going to go over, I'm not even going to be concerned with linking up the web pages, but we're going to be concerned with the HTML5 and the CSS3. All right? Then we'll add some PHP, some MySQL, and some PDO. When we get done with that, we'll add some jQuery, some JavaScript, and some Ajax. So ideally, you know, when you think about it now, it's the 24th and the 2nd, so that's 2 weeks, and then we'll have vacation, or break, whatever you want to call it, and then we'll come back and we'll spend 1 more week on it. I'm hoping within 3 weeks or so we can get that done. What that means is that you will have March 31st, and then all of April, and then May until the last day of class, which is like the 14th when we'll give the projects. So I don't know how many class periods that is, but it's somewhere in the vicinity of 5 to 10. Okay? And that's what this says. I'm not going to read this. I said this, and I said this last semester too, but I don't really think that's going to happen. All right? In between the time that we start on this stuff, between that and the time the class ends, if we have to have a lecture for something, all right, it'll be a mini lecture, 5 or 10 minutes. All right? So this is being assigned today, and it's due 2 weeks from Thursday. Everybody hear that? All right? Now, when I say 2 to 3 pages, I'd rather have 2 to 3 pages than 2 to 3 sentences. All right. In other words, go into a little bit of depth of coverage on as far as what you're going to do, but I've got to be weary of the fact, as you do, that you may change it. You may get into it and you might think it's more than you can handle, or you want to go in a different focus, and that's okay. But I just want some kind of an idea of what it is you're going to be doing. Does that make sense? All right, I wanted to show you this too. It's after the fact, so you can tell me whether or not I did a good job on it. But what I had to basically do yesterday was I had to write Ted Corey some kind of a response. I went and asked, this was the stuff that he asked for, but then I had to, I asked Dave von Falkenstein if he was interested in doing it, the other guy who's in this class, and he said, I'd like to, but it really, from what I can see on there, because I sent him all the paperwork, he said, it sounds like he wants the world. Sound familiar? And he said, I don't have time to do that. So he said, I've got something else I'm going to do the project on. So I wrote him this, and I'll just read it to you. Hello, Corey. After you gave your presentation, I asked the class of second-year students if there was any interest in working on the Back of the Yards project. There was none. I asked why, and the students said that they thought that the amount of work that the project would entail would be more than any of them either individually or collectively could handle, considering their workload for their final semester. I apologize. If you would like, I can ask some of the first-year students if they would have an interest in working as a team on the site. These students are less experienced, and any work they would do would take longer. Please let me know if that would be of interest to you. Otherwise, I would suggest that you contact Foremost Media to have them give you a quote on the site. Again, please let me know your thoughts. Thank you and good luck. Then I thought, well, the problem with that is, let's say he comes back and he says, yeah, I'd like the first year people to work on it. Well, I didn't mean to mislead him, so I sent him this again this morning. Hello again, Corey. One thing I should mention about the first year BTC IT web software developer students. Last semester they had HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript, and Access training. This semester they are getting C# and Java programming language training, along with training in MySQL and jQuery. They do not get any Android or iPhone, iPad app training until the middle of their third semester, i.e. they will know little to nothing regarding apps until about mid to late October of 2015. So I have no idea, if he's going to get back to me or what. The woman who is kind of the go-between in this thing, she works in the office, so she must know him. She sent me a thing today. Oh, Corey really wants to talk to you. And he left this message, and I don't understand any of it, so I'm forwarding it to you. And then the thing was blank. So I thought somehow that was kind of fitting. All right. But, we'll see what happens. All right. Now, just so you know, and I mentioned this to you before, I'm saying it to you again, and that is, if you're not in the virtual desktop, please get into the virtual desktop. Once you're into the virtual desktop, you can go, you know the drill by now, you can go out to the P drive for the class, start up XAMPP, and in the folder with today's date on it, oopsie, not that. So the folder, that folder right there. All right, if you go to that one, I want you to copy the CH09 folder to your virtual desktop, C:\\XAMPP\htdocs folder. All right, so I'll give you a second to do that. Hearing anything, I'll take it for granted that people were able to do that without a problem. All right, just so you see it, if you look up on the screen here, please. what's in that folder, I just asked you to copy this one. There is another folder in there that you may or may not choose to copy over. And it's called PHP-CMS. And it has in it about 4 other folders. And these other folders: build a CMS in an afternoon with PHP and MySQL, developing PHP CMS from scratch tutorial series, how to create an object-oriented blog using PHP, PHP for beginners, building your first CMS. These are all articles that are in a series, all right, or at least most of them are. You'll notice that this one, I guess there's just one. Here's one that's got 9 parts. Here's one that's just one. And here's one that's just one. All right, and if they offer the source code, I put that in there. Okay, so if you wanted to take a look on how to do that. Now, what we're going to be working on and looking at today, and as always, I'm going to bounce back and forth between the book, all right, and XAMPP. But if we look on here, oops, it's going to be 09, not 09. This now works. And when I say it works, I didn't write this, okay? And it's important that you realize that. I know that you do. All right, I wouldn't have sat and put an image in there, you know, where I was trying to basically sell my wares like Ullman tends to do, which is okay that he does that, okay? That's fine. But that said, I'm finding that I think at least, it's very hard to sit there and explain why somebody else did what they did. All right, it's kind of like, and Mike W can probably, you know, commiserate on this. It's like when you are working on somebody else's code, all right, and you look at it and you think, I wouldn't have done it that way. But since what you're doing is maintaining it, and you're told to maintain it rather than rewrite it, that's what you do. And I've had that happen to me before, where I'm maintaining somebody else's code, which I would have rewritten, but my job was to maintain it because it worked. Somebody else came over and started kind of getting on my case. Why'd you do this? I didn't do it. All right? So, yeah, so what I'm telling you is, there are going to be times in here, if you say, well, why'd he do that? I don't know. But he did. All right? And you'll notice, because these didn't work last time, so the home puts you right where you are. There is no archive set up. Contact, there is no contact page set up. Login does have a login page, and we'll talk about that. I know it looks real simple, but we'll talk about it. And register, I think, doesn't go anywhere either. And now if you go here, notice it says this is the 3rd post. Read more, and it just shows the whole thing. Again, it's not like this is, oh, wow, fantastic. But it's what he chose to do. In the last version of this book, he did not have a chapter on content management systems. But they're so popular, all right, and there are so many of them out there that he says that's why he decided to put a chapter in there about them. And the chapter basically has 2 classes that are in it. So he uses some PDO, he uses some OOP, all right, on this SITE, okay? So that's what we're going to be looking at, like I said, for the next couple weeks or so. If we do get done with all of it today, or not today, but between today and Thursday, hey, fine. All right. So if we look in here, notice he's got a lot of stuff. There's somewhere around 500 lines of code in this chapter. And what he says here is, first, let's identify the goals. If you want this to work, so if you want this to work on your machine, I suggest listening to what I say, because I've got all the files you need, but you don't have the database right now. Because one of the first files that you just copied over is, there's an SQL file in there that creates the database. And if you don't create the database first, none of this stuff is going to work. All right? So he identifies his goals, creates the database, creates a template, creates a utility file, creates an error handling file, defines his 2 classes, and if one thing I'd say about the classes, they're very short. You ever heard the word succinct? You know, they're kind of packed together. There's a lot in them without having a lot in them. He creates his home page, talks about viewing the page. We'll get to this, but probably not today, using HTML quick form 2. And you may or may not believe this, but before there was HTML underscore quick form 2, there was HTML underscore quick form. Not one, just quick form. It is a way that you can use PHP, all right, and you can very quickly generate forms for you. Not only that, you know, you say, well, I can do that in HTML5. Yes, you can. But not only that, with virtually any kind of field that you put on the form, by just adding a flag, you could immediately have all the JavaScript be written for you. You don't have to write a line of it. It'll do all the client-side validation for you. So we'll talk a little bit about that. He talks about how to log out of his site. It's very simple. He does not have a lot of admin stuff built into it. All right. So really, if you're logged in at the bottom of the page, there'll be a link down there to log out. If you're logged out, the link on the bottom of the page will allow you to log in. That makes sense? All right, that's about it. Talks about, throughout the chapter, he talks about how you could expand upon this and make it do things that it's not doing right now. So let's suppose, as an example, Laura goes home tonight, and she says, you know, I understood some of the stuff he said in this chapter, but not all of it, so she reads the chapter. And while she's reading the chapter, she sees that about 4 or 5 different places in there, Ullman says, well, you could always do this to expand this site, or you could do this, or you could add this, etc. And she says, I'd like to do that. If that's what she wants to do for her project, she could work on this site. Then I would expect if she's going to do that and work on her site, it's not going to look like this. But she's got a lot of functionality in it already. So if she wanted to add a contact page, if she wanted to add archive capability, etc., she'd be able to do that. Does that make sense? All right. Of course, she may read it and go, that's the last thing in the world I want to do. And that'd be okay, too. All right. Again, what I want, and the idea behind this, I think I mentioned this to you before, but I'm saying it again because it does bear repeating. And that is, whatever you do for a project, the school is really getting big on, have you all heard of the term an electronic portfolio? All right. Years ago, when people first started to just put stuff on CDs, okay? We had a guy who was in here, I can't remember, his first name was Marshall. I can't remember his last name. But he was very intelligent. I mean, a really smart guy. And he was a real smart ass, too. And he went through the program. He graduated the program. When I say he was a smart ass, he would just call me on everything. And I didn't care about that, but it was the way he did it. He talked very condescending to me, which I didn't really appreciate. But the point is, at that time, there used to be, every spring, there was a thing out at McCormick Place in Chicago. And if you don't know, it's right on the Chicago-Indiana borderline, right near the lake. And it was called PC Expo. And they would have a lot of vendors there, including some people who were interested in possibly hiring people. All right? And what we did was I took a group of students and we went there and we made another stop on the way there where there was a little hiring fair. And what he did was he took his resume and a bunch of his examples and he pressed them to CD. Doesn't sound like a big thing now, but that's what he did. Again, imagine this was somewhere, I'd say, I'm going to guess, somewhere around 15 years ago. All right? He got offered 3 jobs. Every place that he went to, they wanted to at least have him in for a second interview. And every single person, because he told me this later, there wasn't one person who they said, you know, the people gave them paper copies of resumes. He had it electronic. All right? Well, the reason I'm telling you that is the school is really big on electronic portfolios. And what they'd like to have is when you graduate and you're out looking for a job, whether it's on a website or wherever it is, you would have examples of some of your work. And the tie into this class is I would think that the hallmark of your electronic portfolio will be the project that you do for this class. All right? Because this is what's known as a capstone class, and the idea behind it is it's supposed to bring together everything you've learned in the last couple of years. So, as he says, for the example, I'll create a content management system. And again, if you say, fine, Jeff, but I'm really and truly not all that sure even what a content management system is. All right? Still not sure what a content management system is. Okay, and it won't let me open that. There it is. Again, CMS, content management system. Okay. And let's see if they've defined it. There we go. The definition of a CMS is an application, more than likely web-based, that provides capabilities for multiple users with multiple or different permission levels to manage content. All right. So if you say it kind of sounds like a blog or some kind of an electronic bulletin board post, that's kind of what it is. And it can be all sorts of things. You can set it up so that anybody can post anything. That's a novel approach, because if anybody can post anything, some people will write all sorts of filth and whatever to see if it gets posted. All right. You can post anything, but literally before it goes up, it's got to be run through some kind of an editing process or by some kind of an administrator. All right. Typically, you've got the ability to go in and read all the posts that are out there and maybe update yours or delete yours, but you can't update and delete other people's. And that's what he's talking about in here. And they also might have things like event calendars, product descriptions, they might have contests, they might have all sorts of different stuff in there. All right. So what he's basically saying here is that sort of the sky's the limit type of an idea. It can be whatever you want it or need it to be. So he says, in keeping with the material taught over the previous 5 chapters, the example will use object-oriented programming. All right. And he does, although there's not a whole heck of a lot of it in there. The goal of this chapter is to implement an example site using OOP. No, it's to implement a change management system or content management system, whatever you want to call it, using OOP. All right. And he says, that said, there's a limit to how much he can give you in a chapter. You can get whole books on this. Okay. So he says this chapter focuses on 2 of the most important aspects of CMS. Pages, in other words, the content that's in there, and users. So he mentions that he's got 16 different scripts and HTML files, 50 pages of the book, and probably several hundred lines of code. But he says he's managed to put in this functionality. You can add pages. It'll show you the most recent page on the home page. Individual pages can be seen in their entirety. I already showed you that. You may or may not have noticed this, but when we looked at it, if I go down to the bottom of the page, or someplace in here, there's login. All right. And if I log in, that'll change to log out. Only administrative users will be allowed to access or edit the page. Only administrative users or author users can create new pages. Now, that's a new thing in this book, because he's actually got 3 kinds of users. All right, there's me, just your typical user. Okay, then there is an administrator and there's an author. Okay, so we'll talk about all those as we get in here. Says, as a bonus, I used a light makeshift approach. He tried as much as possible to use model view controller. All right, as much as he could. And in here, basically, the model is going to be a database. Okay? This is the setup of the site, as shown here on page 284. So under his htdocs, okay, and this is my CH09, you've got all this stuff. And there's actually more to it than what he shows right there, just so you know. So, he says the controllers are represented here by top-level PHP scripts, where probably if this was a true total model view controller site, you'd have a lot more classes than what he has in here. And then he mentions that ways that he could fix this. This is stuff that was discussed earlier in the book using mod rewrite and the .htaccess file. And he talks about it, but he doesn't do that in here. Okay? So, here's the database on pages 286, 287, 288, and 289. So, if you would all look up on the screen here, please, for just a second. And you see what's here. In the CH09 folder, and I guess I didn't remove it, these two files are basically identical to one another. So let's see which one we use. I think it's the CH09 one. No, that's his. And you can use that. No, don't use that one. Use the one I put in, which is called SQL.SQL. Well, let's take a look at what it does. Drop database, if exists, CMS. So if there is a CMS database, it'll remove it. Okay, and if there isn't one, you'll just get a warning saying there isn't one. Then we'll create the database called CMS. We'll make it active, and we have two tables in here. One is a users table. And if you look in here, there's a user ID, a user type, again, public, author, or admin. Notice he's using an enumeration there. A username, an email, a password. You notice that the password is char40, and the reason for that is he's going to encrypt that password. A date added, which he uses a timestamp for. The primary key is the ID or the user ID. Now, you remember this? Because we actually talked about this in the MySQL class, but you may or may not remember it. How many primary keys can you have in a table? One? I agree. It is possible for a primary key to be more than one field, correct? Concatenate a primary key. All right, but you can only have one. So what we want to do is we want to use ID for the primary key, but we want to make sure that each username and each email, they can't be repeated. So by putting unique in there, what that does, technically, what that means is ID and username and email, those are all what are referred to as candidate keys. In other words, any one of them could have conceivably acted as the primary key. And the one we chose was ID. But the other ones, you can't use the same username more than once or the same email more than once. Does that make sense? All right. And he sets indexes up, all right, on the email and the password. And he calls that index login. Then he's got another table that he calls pages. Again, page ID, that'll be your primary key. Does it make sense to people that this field right here, see the one in gray? Everybody see that? That field is the primary key, which is going to be the copy of this field. So you can relate the two tables together. That makes sense? Remember all that stuff with primary and foreign keys? So that's the foreign key, is creator ID. The title of the page, the content of the page, the date the page was updated, the date the page was added, and again, the primary key is the ID, and creator ID and date updated are both indexed. So if you look at this, where it's got insert into pages, okay, and he's got all this stuff right here. This is a post, this is another post, this is a third post. You can all see that when you look up here. Well, what I want to show you is this is a post, this is another post, this is a third post. So he's immediately throwing all that content in there. All right. So I should be able to come in there and do this. Just so you see this. I should be able to come in here. Not from there. And if I wanted to, okay, I should be able then to come in here and like grab this line right here and copy it as an example and run it inside of phpMyAdmin or run it inside of the command mode, and once I run it, since we only have 3 columns, this one would move over here, this one would move over here, this one would be off the page, and the new first one would be right here. Does that make sense? So, if you want to try this and you want this to work, again, what you're going to have to do is this. And I'll just run through the steps with you. And if you don't care, you don't care. But this is something that could at least conceivably help you in the future. All right? So what I'm going to do is from here, from right there, I'm going to go and click my shell button and do my mysql -u root. All right? And now I have, if I show my databases, I already have one right now named CMS. So if I go and type in here, drop database CMS, okay, it's gone now. Boom, it's gone. Well, now notice if I come back in here and refresh, that's what it looked like the other day, remember? Because there's no database that it's hooked up to. And that's why I'm getting this here, unknown database CMS. All right. So now from right here, I can go back into this file that I just told you about, the one that's called sql.sql. I can highlight the entire file, Control A, Control C to copy, come in here and just Control or right mouse click and choose paste, and now it's back in there. All right. And now when I come back in here, and you saw it was garbage, now it's back again. All right. So if you want to do that, fine. If for some reason you don't, then you don't. All right. So what he explains here, again on pages 286, 287, 288, and 289 is what I just went over with you. He explains what's in the tables. He explains why he set it up this way. He does mention in here that right now, if you wanted categories, so let's say that this was going to be a sports type of content management system, and people could talk about, let's assume we have, I don't know, half a dozen major sports. So we have one for pro baseball, pro basketball, pro football, pro hockey, and then let's say college football and college basketball. Okay? So if we wanted to set it up so that we, these different things, we had different categories in here, because maybe when Mark comes in to here, not to there, when Mark comes in to here, all he cares about in here is football. He doesn't like any of the other sports, let's say. All right, so you'd be able to do that. And what he mentions here is if you want to go that route, then what you have to do is you'd have to create a categories table. And you need a pages categories or post categories or something that would act as a junction or jump table between the two. So in other words, this could be expanded from what it is right now. All right? All right. He says if you want to allow users to be able to add comments, you could add a comments table. So he gives you hints and different things that you could do all along the way here. All right? So you know how to access MySQL. You know how to create the database. He basically assumes you're going to key it in by hand here. I already mentioned this to you, but I want to say it again, and that is this is here on the right-hand side of page 287, about halfway down on the page. It says the password will be encrypted using the SHA-1, which outputs a string 40 characters long. Even if you put your password is just, let's say your minimum password is 3 characters, and I put ABC, it'll still be 40 characters long. All right? He says, note that because I'm using OOP side of programming, and this is a really important concept, just so you know. All right, this is the top here of page 288. And he says, I'm using OOP conventions, which is camel case, which is what I've been trying to get you to use for the last 2 years. Because he says you'd have something here like user type, like this, not user underscore type, which again is a viable way to do it in this language. All right? And he said this allows my class code to be like this as opposed to like this. And you almost always will see it this way. So he talks about both tables, goes through them, again, talks about the pages table, and says it's pretty simple, etc. And he goes through all the stuff that's in it. He puts in a couple of users. He puts in a couple of pages. All right. I did download his code from LarryUllman.com. You've got that out there. Of course, it didn't work because he had in there, when you were trying to hook it up to the database, he had just username and password, so I had to change that. I had to change a few other things. I moved some stuff around a little bit, so it's not identical to his, but it is, to be fair to him, very similar. All right. So the next thing he talks about, starting on page 290 and going all the way through page 293, so the next 4 pages, is he talks about how he typically sets up a project like this. And he says the first thing he usually does is the database, which is what he already did on the preceding few pages. All right? And then he says the next thing he does is he tries to come up with his HTML template. And he always says this. He says, having no design skills myself, I was fortunate that, I don't know how you pronounce that, Job Andrews volunteered to create an HTML5 template for me to use for the book. All right? And that's what he's using here. You've already seen what this looks like. And you'll notice it says the entire site can use a 3-include approach. This should look really, really familiar to you because this is the same way he did it in the book we used last semester. All right? He typically will have a header include file and a footer include file. Now notice he's got include views, specific content.html. We'll talk about that later. But the point is, he typically says at the top of the page, every single page at the top is going to be virtually identical. It'll have the same stuff in the header. Like he oftentimes does, the only thing he does change in here is he allows you to set the title based on a variable. Okay? The footer will be the same. So the header like this will be the same all the time. The footer down here will be the same all the time. What's going to be different between these is the content area in here. And again, that's a standard way of doing things. Not the only way of doing things, but it's a way many people set up a site. So as he says, since the header file has a little PHP logic that sets the page title, it can't be a .html file, it must be a .php file. All right. Second, it says both it and the footer will toggle that login link to show whether you're logged in or not logged in. All right. So again, header content, I guess he calls all this his footer content, and the area that's in the middle is the content area. All right. So he goes through these. Again, here's the logic that he talks about. He basically says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a default page header. And if I have not set the page header, just use the default one. All right, and that's what he's saying right there. But if you look right here, here is his entire header.inc.php file. And hopefully, at least, when you look at these 28 lines that you see right here that are on page 291, okay, and there isn't anything that's in there that you don't understand. I mean, it's kind of a good checklist for yourself to go through this. Got your tags. All right, here we've got that shiv, that HTML5 shiv, which will allow older versions of IE to look at your code and not blow up when it sees some of those tags it doesn't know. All right, here's the adding jQuery. Here's our custom jQuery that we're going to put in. There's the CSS reset, your CSS fonts, your main CSS. He's got a thing in here that'll handle IE6 and IE7. And the real header stuff is right there. So there's not a whole heck of a lot in it. But again, you should be able to look at that, and ideally at least, everything that's in there makes sense to you. In much the same way, on the bottom of 292 here, the next page, again, around the same size, a little longer because it goes on to the next page, he's got the footer. All right, and you'll notice it has to be a footer.inc.php because he's got PHP logic here. And he's got PHP logic here. All right, so he needs to, and I think he might even, does he have any here? Yeah, and he's got a little here. All right, but what he's saying is the top, all right, and the bottom of each page should look the same. And again, you'll notice that when I'm here, I'm on the home page, and you can see what it all looks like. If I go to login, that didn't change, and this didn't change. All right. Now I should be able to come in here and register. Let's see if I can, so I'll just try it. All right, so I did that. Yeah, I'll remember the password. The values do not... So it looks as though, looking at this, it says the values submitted did not match those in the file. So you've got to log in as one of the three things that he put in there earlier. So I'm going to do that. I'll go in there as author user, and the password is author pass. So I don't think that that's right, but all right, something, either I didn't read it right or whatever. All I wanted to show you was once you log in, that changes from login to log out. All right. So he explains in here everything that's going on, and ideally too, when you start looking at this, let's see. It says two types of users, authors and administrators, can create new pages. Yeah, we talked about that already. All right, it says we could have written a conditional in here that would have checked for this. So again, that's the hardest thing that he's talked about so far that's on page 293. That's saying, is the user type either admin or author? Okay? So he says, I'm not going to do that. He says it makes more sense to write a method that can return true or false. And that's what the can create page method does that we'll see a little bit later. All right? So that gets us to page 294, writing the utilities file. This is a good time to break. All right, so let's break, and we'll come back at 11 o'clock.